There aren't many 2025 prospects who remain uncommitted, but Gonzaga has their eyes on arguably the best one still on the market.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, folks, I know I teased a guest for today's episode. That's getting pushed back a week, so we got some recruiting updates to talk about instead here on the Locked On Zags podcast. The Zags have their eyes on an uncommitted four-star prospect in the 2025 class, the highest-ranked player who has yet to commit in 2025. We're going to talk about him. We're going to talk about what it means for the Zags, plus a look at the roster next year, a look at Davis Fogle coming in 2025, how he's looked at Compass Prep, a look at another player the Zags are bringing on a visit in just a couple of weeks in the 2026 class. So it's a recruiting focused episode. I'm going to close out the show talking about some pro Zags. We'll talk about Domantas Sabonis after his visit to Spokane and getting his jersey hung in the rafters. We'll talk a little bit about how some of the younger Zags in the NBA are doing and how Courtney Vandersloot is doing in the new unrivaled basketball league. We start with the update we got very recently from Joe Tipton at Tipton Edits on social media, who said the Zags are one of the teams in contact with four-star forward Aleks Alston. Again, one of the very few remaining uncommitted players in the class of 2025. He is a 6'8" small forward from Kenwood Academy in Chicago, but he is nicknamed the Serbian Sniper. He has Serbian roots, four-star prospect. According to On3, one of the premier recruiting services, he's a three-star at 247 Sports. Both of them have composite rankings. Both of them, as you would expect, have him very close in those composite rankings. 247 has him 111th in the 2025 class. On3 has him 112th. Regardless, he is considered a borderline top 100 prospect. Again, four-star recruit, according to On3. And pretty much everybody else ahead of him in that recruiting class has made a commitment at this point. So for teams that are on the prowl for more freshmen to bring into their program starting in 2025, it makes sense that they would be interested in Alston's services. And that's a pretty long list. Recent update from On3 indicates that Gonzaga among the teams interested in Alston alongside Kansas State, Texas A&M, Cal, Arizona State, Memphis, LSU, Indiana, and Tulsa. The other big factor here is that Alston is also in contact with KK Mega Basket, which is a professional team in Serbia. If that name sounds familiar, it is because that is where Filip Petrusev, after his 2 years at Gonzaga, he left Gonzaga early, opted to return home to Serbia, his home country, balled out for this team. I averaged like 24 a game, then got drafted in the second round by the Philadelphia 76ers, ended up still playing professionally overseas, got 2 games in the NBA and is now back overseas. But that is where that comes from. Obviously, we mentioned that Alston has Serbian roots, so he is looking at potentially going to play in Serbia along with all of the other schools that are interested. That's the full list that he reported recently in an interview with Jamie Shaw of On3 that are the schools interested in him right now. But it's worth acknowledging that he took some unofficial visits last year in 2023. Some of the schools in that list are not schools that are currently on this list. That would include Michigan State, Illinois, Xavier, Tennessee, Ohio State. Indiana was on that list. So it sounds like he took an unofficial visit to Indiana back in 2023 and that they are still pursuing him as of right now. Doesn't necessarily mean they're in the lead or anything like that. They just happen to be the one team that is the through line between the visits he took in 2023 and the current list of teams that are pursuing him. He indicated to Jamie Shaw that he is planning to take more visits after this high school season ends before making a decision. So he's not in a big hurry, despite being one of the last players remaining, one of the last more marquee players remaining, I should say, in that 2025 recruiting class. One of the things that's worth pointing out here, as it often is with A, players that Gonzaga recruits, and B, players who are still uncommitted, certain players who are uncommitted who are getting attention from that laundry list of very productive, talented, successful programs, is that they're late risers. We're going to talk about that in the second segment with Davis Fogle. It was a part of the conversation with Dusty Stromer. It was a part of the conversation with Julian Strother. It was part of the conversation with Braden Huff. So often Gonzaga identifies players a little earlier than other teams. It's been frustrating lately in the sense that Gonzaga has often identified players and reached out to said players and pursued said players to have them end up going to Duke, in the case of Nick Kamenia. Isaiah Harwell was a local kid. He always had pedigree, but still kind of a similar situation there. But Gonzaga, this is what they're really, really good at. You got to land the kids. That's obviously a part of it, but Gonzaga is very good at identifying this talent and getting their name out there early. Now, it's not early, obviously, on Alston in general, but certainly a player who has kind of risen up the ranks, in part due to a very productive performance at the Pangos All-American Camp this summer. And I'm going to just read a scouting report, paraphrase a scouting report, or at least pick and choose some quotes from Jamie Shaw on 3. This is what he said after seeing Alston, play at the Pangos All-American Camp. He says, quote, "He is a scorer and at 6'7" would prefer to face the basket and take jump shots. The lefty has a consistent release and smooth shooting touch. He also played aggressively in the passing lanes and finished in transition. He had a game of 22 and a game of 15 points, showcasing his scoring prowess. Now he needs to continue to diversify his offensive game and continue to develop the handle. There is upside here, and he has had a solidly productive camp." So not anything world beating, but again, for a player still available at this point to be 6'7" or 6'8", depending on 3 lists him at 6'8". Jamie said 6'7", doesn't really matter. To have scoring touch, to have a face-up ability, to have showcase some ability defensively, to get in the passing lanes, to get out in transition, and to be listed as somebody who has upside. That's pretty good when you're talking about the handful of players in that 2025 class who are still available. So what all does this mean for Gonzaga? Well, not anything extreme at this point. It means that Gonzaga is looking to fill out their 2025 roster, which no doy. Of course, they're looking to fill out their 2025 roster. Every coach in the country is always operating, looking a few steps ahead. You always have to be. It's how Gonzaga lands a guy like Jalen Warley in the middle of their season. It's how Gonzaga, Jun-Suk Yo showed up halfway through the year a few years ago. Ben Gregg showed up halfway through the year because of the COVID year. Like, you're always looking to make adjustments, to tinker, to make late additions to your roster, early additions to your roster, whatever you can do. And for Gonzaga, they know Ben Gregg is graduating at the end of the year. Or I should say, they know Ben Gregg is departing the program after this year out of eligibility. They know that Caleb Battle and Nolan Hickman and Ryan Nembhard are departing the program after this year due to eligibility as well. At this point, we do not know if Graham Ike is going to return, although there is a healthy expectation that this is his final season playing college basketball. However, he does have the eligibility to return. Michael Ajayi now also has the eligibility to return. In case you missed this story, it came out right around Christmas time, so I know some people probably didn't hear it. Players who are out of eligibility after this year, who had played at junior college level in football and basketball and baseball and any sport, if you were going to be out of eligibility at the end of this year, but some of your eligibility was utilized at the junior college level, you now have an extra year of eligibility. That includes Michael Ajayi. He could return to school. That may not happen at Gonzaga. What we know right now is that Michael Ajayi's draft stock is not better than it was last year. He is likely not on NBA draft radar because he is not performing well. He's not shooting well. We all know, we've had plenty of conversation about Michael Ajayi. So he could opt to return to Gonzaga and look to have a bigger role next year for a Gonzaga team that's losing a ton of depth. They may want to have him back. They may not want to have him back. We're not seeing a lot of the things happening behind the scenes, so we don't exactly know, but there's a couple different outcomes here. Michael opts to decide to go professional and begin his pro career and his college basketball career. Michael chooses to stay in college, wants to come back to Gonzaga. Gonzaga says, hey, we think it's best if you look somewhere else. Michael Ajayi decides he wants to come back to school and decides he wants to hit the transfer portal and look somewhere else. Or Michael Ajayi decides he wants to return to school. He wants to come back to Gonzaga. Gonzaga says, yes, welcome back. Those are the 4 options. I don't know which one is going to be. This Gonzaga pursuing a 6'8" small forward / power forward doesn't change that it doesn't mean anything to me. It does not mean that they're done with Ajayi. That is an extreme read on this. Even if this kid commits to Gonzaga, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. He may redshirt, as they did with Braden Huff. He may just be added depth. They may really view him as a 3 instead of a 4. There's a lot of different things that this could reasonably mean. Power forward is a known area of need for Gonzaga, regardless of the Michael Ajayi situation, because Ben Gregg is going to be out of eligibility. So again, that doesn't really change that fact. Gonzaga's newcomers joining the team next year are Braden Smith, Jalen Warley, and Davis Fogle. We're going to talk about Fogle in a second. Smith is a freshman. He's a point guard who is redshirting right now. Warley is a wing, who is also redshirting for the team right now. Neither of those guys play the same position. I guess you could argue Warley and Alston are potentially the same position as the three, but I think there's a chance that they'd look at him as a small ball 4 option. So it just means that Gonzaga is looking at potential ways to add to their roster. They're looking at ways to add freshmen, which is something that's been a little bit more difficult for them lately. But the development of freshmen in this program, particularly freshman bigs, has always been phenomenal. Huff and Gregg are 2 great examples, 2 perfect examples already on the roster right now. Drew Timme, Anton Watson, Filip Petrusev, we talked about him already, Killian Tilly, Rui Hachimura, Shemek Karnowski. There are so many examples of freshmen bigs coming into this program and developing to be very successful players, sometimes across 2 or 3 seasons, sometimes across 4 seasons, sometimes right away. It just varies, but if you want to be if you view yourself as a 4, as Alston potentially does, or even as a 3, if you view yourself as somebody who wants to go to a program to develop over the course of a couple of years, Gonzaga should be right at the top of your list. And ideally, that is the situation here with Alston. Well, a lot has been made about Gonzaga's recruiting the last couple of years as NIL and the transfer portal have dramatically altered all of college athletics. We're going to talk about that and more coming up in just a second. But first, folks, PrizePicks is the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players, and if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Yes, that's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. Looking ahead to playoff NFL Sunday, Scary Terry McLaurin for the Washington Commanders, 64.5 receiving yards against Philadelphia this Sunday. I like the over. I think he's going to put up a big game. If you hit the over, you pick one other player, you hit the over on that one, boom. You are making real money. It's fun to predict. It's easy to play. Plus, with PrizePicks' flex play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And with the app, you get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. So download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking recruiting here on a Wednesday edition of the Locked On Zags podcast in the midst of a week without a midweek game. The Zags 7 days between the loss to Santa Clara and their upcoming game at the Chiles Center against the Portland Pilots. So taking a chance to do some recruiting updates, especially in the midst of the update we got about Aleks Alston being a new target for Gonzaga. What else do we have in the just cooking for this Zags team on the recruiting trail? Not a ton right now. It's kind of a slow period for that, but we do know Gonzaga has committed Davis Fogle in the class of 2025. He's a 6'7" wing. He's initially from Anacortes, Washington. He was balling out at Anacortes High School, played well in the summer circuit, eventually transferred. He's now at Compass Prep, which is a high-level basketball factory, frankly. And he's been playing at Compass Prep this year. And I think there was a lot of kind of, I don't want to say consternation necessarily, but intrigue about how a player who is, playing at a lower level in the state of Washington, obviously you're going to dominate at that level. And yeah, he played for the Seattle Select team in the summer circuit and he played well there. So there wasn't this like extreme panic that he would not be able to handle playing at a different level at Compass Prep. But the early returns, pretty darn good. He's played very well for this Compass Prep team. He looks great. He grew a bunch. He was like 6'2", 6'3" when Gonzaga was first kind of showing a little interest in him. He grew to 6'7". That's going to make you a little bit more appealing as a prospect. So it's been nice to see him grow. This is a report from Travis Branham over the weekend. Branham, a writer at 247 Sports. There was a great game between Compass Prep and Prolific Prep. And Branham wrote up a report about many of the players in these games. And this is what he had to say about Fogle. Quote, Fogle's versatility as a slashing and playmaking wing have always stood out, but his competitiveness and shot making really shined on Friday. He had some tough shots, both from 3 and mid-range, while being aggressive off the dribble and battling on Defense, love to hear that. From every highlight I have seen of him on Instagram, you can tell he is a tenacious dude. He throws down some absolutely hammer dunks on people. He's always flexing. He's always very, very enthusiastic, energy guy. You love to see that. It sounds like that competitiveness is really shining in these games. Another report, this is from the director of scouting for 247 Sports from Finkelstein, fantastic basketball analyst. Report on Davis Fogle that he is at college prep. Again, this is just a snippet from his overall scout. If you want to check out the rest of it, go to 247 Sports, check out Davis Fogle's page. That's where you'll see this. Here's the quote from Finkelstein. At Compass, he's adjusted to new levels of competition without any reluctance and proven the vertical athleticism and physicality to more than hold his own. He has addressed some questions about his shooting and seems to be reliable as a spot-up floor spacer. Overall, Fogle may need to keep getting stronger and keep proving the consistency of his shooting, but he is still early in the arc of his overall development, has extremely versatile tools, and the approach that makes it easy to bet on his long-term development. So it's a lot of excitement about the player that Davis Fogle has been, the player that he has developed into already during his high school career, and the upside of the player he could become, especially in Mark Few's system. Yes, the majority of scouting on Davis Fogle, dating back to when he was at Anacortes High School to now, focuses on his offense. I don't know that Davis Fogle, let me tell you this. Freshmen rarely come into college basketball immediately impacting the game on the defensive end. I know I can already hear people thinking of Jalen Suggs and Chet Holmgren. They are elite, 5-star, one and done, very good NBA players for a reason. It is extremely rare to have that level of impact defensively as a freshman. So I wouldn't expect Fogle to be a good defensive player for Gonzaga right away. Fortunately, they have Jalen Warley, they have Emmanuel Innocente, they have Dusty Stromer, all in the mix for next year. They're not going to need him to be that type of player. But the size, especially as he adjusts to being 6'7" now and playing at that and getting stronger as he fills out and just gets more mature, could definitely lend itself to him being a productive player on that end. But right now we're seeing a player with elite athleticism, with a high motor, with a super competitive edge, who has scaled up the level he's playing at from 2A in the state of Washington to Seattle Select to Compass Prep, and has not shied away from the competition and has not had any issues adjusting to said competition. That is a very promising sign of the player he could and hopefully will develop into in Spokane. Other recruiting updates for Gonzaga, not a ton, but we do have a player coming to visit in just a couple of weeks. Sam Funches, a center in the 2026 recruiting class, is set to visit Spokane February 14th through 16th, with the game on the 15th being against the Pepperdine Wave. So he's going to come out, see campus, hang out with the team, watch them, hopefully take it to Pepperdine at home. And this is a very high-profile player, 6'10" center. He's from Madison, Mississippi. He's a lefty, just like Alston, who we just spoke about, just like basically every Gonzaga big. It's crazy the percentage of Gonzaga bigs that are left-handed. We'll talk about Sabonis a little later, but currently on this roster, Braden Huff, Graham Ike, Ismaila Diani, they're all left-handed. Sam Dower was left-handed. Shemek Karnowski was left-handed. It is insane how many the Zag bigs have been left-handed. Funches would join that mix if he were to come to Gonzaga. He's a 4-star center. He's 46th in the 247 Sport composite rankings. He's the 3rd ranked center in the 2026 class. This kid's very, very good. He's already taken official visits to Ole Miss and Cal. His dad played college ball at UConn and then transferred to North Texas. While he played at North Texas, one of the assistant coaches was Chris Beard, who is now the head coach at Ole Miss. Considering Funches is from Mississippi and has this connection to Chris Beard, considering Ole Miss is one of the top 15 teams in the country right now, they are the favorite for a reason. It does not mean Gonzaga will not land him, but they are the favorite for a reason. Funches also has offers from Mississippi State, from Auburn, from Alabama, from Georgia Tech, Kansas State, Creighton, Texas A&M, Houston. The list goes on and on and on. On3 currently lists Ole Miss as the highest odds to land Funches, although Gonzaga is second on that list. Take that with a grain of salt, but certainly they are in the mix. He's still planning to come out and visit in February. And as I said when talking about Alston, there's not a better place to go if you want to develop as a big man than Gonzaga. Truly, they are elite at developing big man talent. Funches would be a star at Gonzaga. He'd learn behind the scenes. Huff would be a senior by the time he's a freshman, assuming Braden sticks around. Diani would be an upperclassman. Funches could step in, play a big role right away, and immediately become a Zag legend if you were to come onto campus. The Zags have missed out on some big targets, but I've said this quite a bit over the offseason. I like to reiterate it here. Mark Few and Gonzaga's success hasn't really been built on the back of five-star talent. Yes, to get to the next level, to get to that national championship, you probably do want some five-star talent, and Gonzaga missing out on recent talent is frustrating. It's more frustrating. Everything is exacerbated when the team's not doing well. Not having players like Asa Newell and Zoom Diallo, who are both solid freshmen. Newell's playing great for Georgia. Diallo's been up and down for Washington. They were both guys that Gonzaga was pursuing. Obviously for next year, Isaiah Harwell no longer coming to Gonzaga, Kingston Flemings, both of those guys going to Houston. You miss out on Kamenia, who's going to Duke. You miss out on a few other targets as well in that class. It's tough. It's tough. And I get it. And I wanted to see those guys in Spokane too. And it's tough to continue to swing and miss on high profile prospects. But again, Gonzaga has developed talent at an extremely high rate without needing to rely on five-star talent. They also utilize the transfer portal really well. And that is part of what is making this season sting so much, is that they went out and landed two high-profile players in the transfer portal, which made the sting of not landing Newell or Diallo in that upcoming class feel a little bit less impactful, or even Trent Perry, who ends up going to UCLA. But then Battle and Ajayi don't live up to the expectations. Battle has at times. Ajayi really hasn't at times. I think that's a fair thing to say. And so Gonzaga, who rarely swings and misses on transfers, this is not a common thing for the Zags, don't get the exact production they need out of the two players they add in the transfer portal. It makes not getting the freshman for this class or the freshman for next class sting a little bit more. Doesn't mean it shouldn't sting. Doesn't mean it's not valid. It is. It's just one of those things that is being exacerbated a little bit right now. But certainly for Gonzaga, I think we're going to continue to see them allocate their NIL resources towards transfers as opposed to freshmen. Obviously, they're pursuing freshmen. They're pursuing five-star freshmen. But my read on the situation is that Mark Few and the staff are only willing to pay so much, partly because, they don't have as endless supply of money the way that Alabama and some of the SEC schools do, but also because they're somewhat picky and they want to spend their money on veteran players, on older players. Mark Few doesn't want to have a full roster full of developmental pieces. He'll get a few, and yet he'll also want to supplement with some more older veteran guys. So that's kind of my read on the situation. We'll see how it comes together this offseason. Certainly a player like Alston falling into your lap as a high-rising prospect who still has yet to commit. That's the kind of thing that Mark Few and the staff love to do. And if they can pull that off, that's going to make this team even better. If not right away in 2025, 26, certainly in the next couple of years. Well, folks, we're going to switch away from our recruiting talk here to close out the show, talking about Domantas Sabonis, who continues to crush it with Sacramento, plus some other Zags in the NBA, and of Courtney Vandersloot update as well. All that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, and I know this to be true, therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve your sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. And it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your own home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for the most insured members, there is a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege and enter promo code SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege, enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. One more time, Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege, promo code SPACE80. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags. Closing out the show, looking to the NBA to talk about some of our Zags playing professionally at that level, how they're doing, some updates on some injuries. We'll start with Domantas Sabonis, who in the midst of the 2-game losing streak and the embarrassing performance against Santa Clara on Saturday, we never talked about the fact that the best part that happened in that game by far was Domantas Sabonis showing up, getting to talk to the broadcasters, getting to talk to the crowd, getting his jersey hung up in the rafters. Incredible player, incredible accomplishment and honor for him to have his jersey up there in the rafters. And he's playing some really, really good basketball right now for the Sacramento Kings. Not like he hasn't been for the last, decade at the NBA level, but it's been phenomenal to see this year. 39 games for Sacramento this year, 36 minutes a game. Sabonis is averaging 20.8 points, 14.2 boards, 6.3 assists. He's shooting 63% on twos. He's shooting 48.4% from three. Folks, that is a career high in points per game. That is a career high in rebounds per game. He also has a career high in free throw percentage at 76.7. Sabonis is also leading the NBA in rebounds per game, which, by the way, he did the last 2 years. So if that holds, he would be a 3-time consecutive rebounding champion in the NBA. He is leading the NBA in three-point percentage. If I asked you right now, which former Zag playing the NBA is leading in three-point percentage, maybe you'd guess Corey Kispert. Maybe you'd guess Andrew Nembhard, super hot shot. Maybe you'd guess if there's no minimum, maybe you'd guess Julian Strawther. I don't know how many of you would guess Domantas Sabonis, but that is the guy leading the NBA in three-point percentage right now, 48.4%. It's actually not a career high because he shot 52.9% in 2018-19. Granted, that was on 9 of 17 shooting, so not nearly the volume. This year, he's 45 of 93, just absolutely scorching hot for Domantas Sabonis. He should absolutely make the All-Star team in the Western Conference. Yeah, it's crowded. You got Nikola Jokic, you got LeBron and Anthony Davis from the Lakers, you got Wembanyama for San Antonio, you got Kevin Durant, Jalen Williams, shout out Santa Clara there. You got Jaren Jackson Jr. at Memphis, Alperen Sengun for Houston. Tons of great talent in the front court. Sabonis absolutely, unquestionably deserves to be there. He won't get voted in because he's not a popular name. He's not showing up even in the top 10 of voting for Western. I think he's like 9th actually for Western Conference forwards, but he should get picked as one of the reserves, absolutely, with the way he's playing this year. A couple of our NBA Zag updates. Chet Holmgren, out at least 3 more weeks. He has not played since November 10th after suffering a hip injury during a game. He's now expected to not return until after the All-Star break, 3 to 5 more weeks till he'll be evaluated again. Through his first 10 games with Oklahoma City, his second NBA season, Chet was averaging 16.5 points, a little under 9 boards, 2.5 blocks per game. Bummer to not get to see him back till after the All-Star break. Hopefully he can finish the season strong. Andrew Nembhard having a career year for the Indiana Pacers, 28 games for him. He was dealing with some injuries earlier in the year. He started every game. This would be the first time in his career he is a full-time starter. The last few years, he started most of his games, but not quite all of them. He's averaging 28 minutes per game. He's also averaging 10.6 points, 5 assists, 3.3 boards, and 1 steal, career high in every single one of those categories for Nembhard. Great to see him having the best season of what has already been a well above average career for a guy many didn't think was even going to be drafted when the NBA draft rolled around. Julian Strawther, speaking of guys who were drafted much higher than people anticipated, Strawther, second year with the Denver Nuggets, has basically doubled up every one of his stats. He's already played 42 games. He's played 22 minutes a game. Last year was 10.8. So basically exactly double. And everything else about double. 9.3 points per game, 2.2 boards, 1.5 assists, shooting 37% from 3. It's been so fun to see Julian have a significant daily role with Denver, being in 22 minutes per game. He is playing every game, significant minutes. He is a sharpshooter. He's contributing defensively. He's really been a effective piece of a Denver team that has disappointed for the most part this year. But when they've needed to rely on him coming off the bench, he's had some 17, 18-point games. It's been really fun to see him already start to fill a bigger role than many would have expected him to fill in just his second NBA season. And then last and certainly not least, moving away from the NBA, we're only 2 games into the new unrivaled women's basketball league, but I wanted to give an update as Courtney Vandersloot, Gonzaga legend, is playing in this league. It is a 3-on-3 women's basketball league set up by Brianna Stewart and a few others as well. It is basically an alternative for players who the WNBA season runs over the summer, over the winter. They are in the off season. Many players have been going overseas to play professionally. A lot of players do not want to do that, in part because of the Brittany Griner situation from a few years ago, in part because you shouldn't have to go play overseas when you're one of the best on the entire planet and you want to stay home and be with your family around the holidays. And I understand totally not wanting to play a grueling WNBA season and then go play professionally in another country and then come back. So this league is kind of set up as a way for players to stay here. The games are in Las Vegas. It's 3-on-3, so it's a different style, and it's been fun to watch. It's been fun to check out, fun to see how it's going. There's 36 players, as there's 6 teams, 6 players on each team. At Courtney, among those teams, she plays for a team called Mist BC, Brianna Stewart among her teammates, alongside Jewel Lloyd, former Seattle Storm player, both of them former Seattle Storm players, of course. So we've seen Courtney in 2 games now. Next games are this weekend, I think the 24th and the 25th. All of the teams will be in action those 2 days. In Courtney's first game, she had 11 points, a pair of assists, a pair of boards. She shot 4 of 7, including 1 of 2 from 3. She played 8 minutes. The game's only 20 minutes long, so there's not a lot of playing time to go around. Game 2, not as great for Courtney. 5.6 boards, 2 steals, an assist, and a block. She did shoot 2 of 11 from the field and 1 of 5 from 3, but I'm sure she's having an absolute blast getting a chance to play a different style of basketball, not having to go overseas, hopefully keeping her a little bit fresher as she's dealt with a pretty hard season this year. She lost her mother. That was something we talked about on the show. I think it affected her emotionally throughout the season. She's kind of relegated to a backup role on a stacked New York Liberty team with Sabrina Ionescu starting at the 1. For Sloot, hopefully she's back to having some fun, playing some basketball, playing a different style, and we'll kind of use this to have a resurgent season next year in the WNBA. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast, folks. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as we talk some recruiting, talk some fun stuff as we get ready for Gonzaga's next game against the Portland Pilots on Saturday. We'll be back with more fun stuff for you on Thursday. Then we'll get you ready for that game, talk specifically what we want to see from Gonzaga against their first repeat team of the West Coast Conference season. Get you all ready for that on Friday. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And as always, go Zags.